For 43 years, Sergeant Major William Bull Patterson carried a secret that would have destroyed his military career, his reputation, and possibly his life if it had ever been revealed. During a classified reconnaissance mission in the remote wilderness of Alaska in 1979, this decorated combat veteran didn't just encounter a creature that officially doesn't exist. He spent 6 days living alongside a family of Bigfoot, learning their language, understanding their culture, and discovering that everything the military had told him about these beings was a deliberate lie designed to justify their systematic extermination. In his final confession, recorded just hours before his death from lung cancer in 2022, Patterson revealed the most extraordinary first-hand account of human-creature interaction ever documented. His testimony exposed not only the advanced intelligence and moral superiority of these beings, but the horrifying truth about why the government had spent decades hunting them, and the devastating consequences of a war between species that the American people never knew was being fought in their name. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and comment down below where you're watching from. Sergeant Major William Patterson was 79 years old when he passed away at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Anchorage, Alaska, on March 22, 2022. To his fellow veterans and the medical staff who cared for him during his final months, he was a highly decorated soldier who had served his country with distinction for over 30 years, including multiple tours in Vietnam, classified operations in Central America, and special assignments that remained shrouded in military secrecy. His official record showed commendations for valor, expert marksmanship, and leadership under extreme conditions. He had been awarded the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and numerous other decorations that marked him as one of the military's most reliable and effective operators. But his most significant mission, the assignment that would haunt him for the rest of his life and ultimately drive him to break his oath of silence, remained buried in classified files so deep that even his closest military colleagues had never heard of it. The mission, codenamed Arctic Thunder, was launched in September 1979, following intelligence reports that suggested unusual activity in the remote interior of Alaska. Satellite imagery had detected structures and movement patterns that didn't match known wildlife behavior, and acoustic monitoring had picked up vocalizations that appeared to be a form of complex communication. Military officials, already aware of creature encounters in other parts of the United States, suspected that Alaska might harbor the largest and most organized population of these beings yet discovered. The vast wilderness, minimal human presence, and extreme environmental conditions would provide ideal conditions for a species that preferred to remain hidden from human observation. Patterson, then 36 years old and already a veteran of numerous classified operations, was selected to lead a small reconnaissance team into the area to assess the situation and gather intelligence about whatever they might encounter. His reputation for maintaining operational security, adapting to extreme conditions, and making sound tactical decisions under pressure made him the ideal choice for a mission that could encounter unknown variables. They chose me because I had experience with situations that couldn't be explained through normal military doctrine, Patterson would later confess in his deathbed recording. I'd been involved in operations where the official story didn't match what actually happened, and I had proven that I could keep my mouth shut about things that the military didn't want discussed publicly. The team consisted of Patterson and 3 other specialists: Corporal James Spider Martinez, a communications expert and survival specialist, Sergeant David Ghost Thompson, a sniper and reconnaissance specialist, and Corporal Michael Doc Williams, a medic with extensive wilderness training. All 4 men had top-secret clearances and had been briefed on the possibility that they might encounter unusual wildlife during their mission, but the briefing they received before deployment was deliberately vague and misleading. They were told that they might encounter large, aggressive primates that had somehow survived in the Alaskan wilderness, possibly descendants of prehistoric species that had been thought extinct. They were warned that these creatures might be dangerous and were authorized to use lethal force if threatened. They made it sound like we were hunting dangerous animals, Patterson recalled in his confession. They gave us the impression that we were dealing with primitive beasts that posed a threat to human safety. Nothing in our briefing prepared us for what we actually encountered. The team was inserted by helicopter into a remote valley approximately 200 miles northeast of Fairbanks, in an area so isolated that the nearest human settlement was over 100 miles away. Their mission was to conduct a 2-week reconnaissance operation gathering intelligence about creature activity while avoiding direct contact if possible. The insertion went smoothly, and the team established a base camp in a concealed location that provided good observation of the surrounding area while remaining hidden from aerial or ground surveillance. Their equipment included advanced communication gear, night vision systems, long-range cameras and acoustic monitoring devices that could detect and record sounds from several miles away. For the first 3 days, the mission proceeded according to plan. The team conducted systematic patrols of the area, mapped the terrain, and established observation posts that would allow them to monitor creature activity without being detected. They found evidence of large bipedal creatures, footprints, disturbed vegetation, and what appeared to be constructed shelters, but no direct sightings. The evidence was everywhere, Patterson documented in his personal notes. Footprints that were clearly not from any known animal, structures that showed intelligent construction, and signs of tool use that indicated problem-solving capabilities, but we still hadn't seen the creatures themselves. The situation changed dramatically on the 4th day, when Corporal Williams became seriously ill with what appeared to be severe food poisoning or a reaction to contaminated water. His condition deteriorated rapidly, with symptoms that included high fever, delirium, and respiratory distress that threatened his life. The team's communication equipment had been experiencing intermittent failures since their arrival, possibly due to atmospheric conditions or equipment malfunction. They were unable to establish reliable contact with their base to request medical evacuation, and Williams' condition was too severe to attempt evacuation on foot. Doc was dying, Patterson recalled with obvious emotion. We were over 100 miles from the nearest medical facility. Our radios weren't working, and we didn't have the medical supplies to treat whatever was killing him. I was facing the possibility of losing one of my men in the middle of nowhere. Patterson made the decision to leave the concealed base camp and search for higher ground where they might be able to establish radio contact. He left Martinez and Thompson with Williams while he conducted a solo reconnaissance to find a suitable location for emergency communication. It was during this solo mission that Patterson had his first direct encounter with the beings they had been sent to observe. I was climbing a ridge about 2 miles from our camp when I realized I was being watched, Patterson recounted in his confession. I had that feeling you get when you're in the crosshairs, when someone has you in their sights and you're completely exposed, but when I looked around, I couldn't see anything. Patterson's military training had taught him to trust his instincts, and every instinct was telling him that he was in immediate danger. He took cover behind a large boulder and waited, scanning the surrounding area for any sign of movement or threat. That's when I saw him, Patterson continued, the biggest creature I'd ever encountered, standing about 50 yards away, just watching me. He was at least 9 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair, with shoulders that were broader than any human I'd ever seen. But it was his eyes that got to me. Intelligent, curious, and completely unafraid. The creature made no aggressive moves, showed no signs of hostility, and appeared to be as curious about Patterson as Patterson was about him. For several minutes, the two beings simply observed each other, each trying to assess the intentions and capabilities of the other. I had my rifle ready, Patterson admitted. My training told me to eliminate the threat, to shoot first and ask questions later, but something about the way he was looking at me made me hesitate. He wasn't acting like a dangerous animal. He was acting like an intelligent being who was trying to figure out what I was doing in his territory. The standoff was broken when the creature began making a series of vocalizations that were clearly attempts at communication. The sounds were complex, structured, and obviously intentional, not the random noises of an animal, but the deliberate speech of an intelligent being trying to establish contact. He was trying to talk to me, Patterson realized. Not in English, obviously, but in his own language. He was making sounds and gestures that were clearly meant to communicate something, and he was waiting for me to respond. Patterson, drawing on his military training in cross-cultural communication, began making simple gestures and vocalizations in response. He pointed to himself, said his name, and used basic hand signals to indicate peaceful intentions. The creature responded immediately, mimicking Patterson's gestures and attempting to reproduce some of his vocalizations. The interaction continued for nearly an hour, with both beings gradually developing a rudimentary form of communication based on gestures, simple sounds, and shared understanding. It was like first contact with an alien species, Patterson described. We were two completely different kinds of beings trying to establish communication and trust. But he was obviously intelligent, obviously curious, and obviously peaceful in his intentions. The communication session was interrupted when the creature suddenly became alert and began making urgent vocalizations while pointing in the direction of Patterson's base camp. The being's behavior suggested that something was wrong, that there was some kind of emergency or threat that required immediate attention. He knew something was happening at my camp, Patterson realized. Somehow he was aware that my team was in trouble, and he was trying to warn me about it. His intelligence network was better than anything the military had taught me to expect. Patterson began moving back toward his base camp, with the creature following at a distance. The being's behavior suggested that he wanted to help, but was uncertain about how Patterson would react to his presence near the human camp. When Patterson reached the camp, he found his team in crisis. William's condition had worsened dramatically, and Martinez and Thompson were preparing to attempt an emergency evacuation that would likely result in the deaths of all 3 men. Doc was unconscious, barely breathing, and burning up with fever, Patterson documented. Spider and Ghost were getting ready to carry him out on a makeshift stretcher, but we were over 100 miles from help, and the terrain was impossible for that kind of evacuation. They were going to die trying to save him. Patterson was facing an impossible decision when the creature he had encountered approached the camp perimeter. Instead of hiding or fleeing, the being made deliberate vocalizations that attracted the attention of the entire team. He walked right up to the edge of our camp, Patterson recalled with amazement. This massive, powerful creature that could have killed all of us without breaking a sweat, and he was obviously trying to help. He was pointing at Doc, making sounds that were clearly expressions of concern, and gesturing in ways that suggested he knew what was wrong. The creature's behavior convinced Patterson that the being was offering assistance, but his team members were terrified and prepared to open fire on what they perceived as a deadly threat. My men were ready to shoot, Patterson admitted. They saw a monster that was threatening our position, and their training told them to eliminate the threat immediately. I had to make a split-second decision that would either save Doc's life or get us all killed. Patterson ordered his men to lower their weapons and allow the creature to approach. The being moved slowly and deliberately, making calming vocalizations and keeping his hands visible to demonstrate peaceful intentions. When the creature reached Williams, he began examining the unconscious soldier with obvious medical knowledge. The being's assessment was thorough and systematic, indicating familiarity with human physiology and diagnostic procedures that exceeded what would be expected from a primitive forest dweller. He knew exactly what was wrong with Doc, Patterson observed. He examined him like a trained medic, checking his pulse, his breathing, his temperature, and his symptoms. Then he made vocalizations that were clearly communicating a diagnosis to someone else. The creature's vocalizations were answered by similar sounds from the surrounding forest, indicating that other beings were nearby and were being informed about the situation. Within minutes, 2 additional creatures appeared at the camp perimeter, carrying what appeared to be plant materials and primitive medical implements. They had a medical team, Patterson realized with astonishment. These beings had responded to a medical emergency with organized, systematic medical care. They knew what they were doing, and they were obviously experienced in treating the kind of poisoning that was killing Doc. The creatures worked together to prepare and administer a treatment that involved crushing specific plants into a paste that was applied to William's skin and mixed with water for him to drink. The procedure was conducted with obvious medical expertise and careful attention to dosage and application. They saved his life, Patterson stated simply in his confession. Within hours, Doc's fever broke, his breathing improved, and he regained consciousness. These beings had diagnosed and treated a condition that would have killed him, using medical knowledge that exceeded anything in our field manuals. The successful treatment of Williams created a bond between the human team and the creature family that would define the remainder of their mission. The beings, apparently satisfied that the humans posed no threat, invited Patterson and his men to accompany them to their settlement. They wanted us to come with them, Patterson explained, not as prisoners or threats, but as guests. They had helped us, and now they were offering us hospitality and protection. It was the kind of gesture that you'd expect from civilized beings, not primitive animals. Patterson made the decision to accept the invitation, despite the fact that it violated his mission parameters and could be considered fraternization with potential enemy forces. His primary concern was the welfare of his team, and the creatures had demonstrated both the ability and willingness to provide medical care that his men might need. I decided that keeping my men alive was more important than following orders that were based on false assumptions, Patterson admitted. These beings had saved Doc's life and they were offering us protection and assistance. I wasn't going to reject that help because some general in Washington thought they were dangerous animals. The creature settlement was located approximately 5 miles from Patterson's base camp in a hidden valley that was completely concealed from aerial observation. The community consisted of approximately 30 individuals of various ages, living in structures that demonstrated sophisticated engineering and environmental integration. It was a real village, Patterson described with obvious admiration. Permanent buildings, organized agriculture, water management systems, and social organization that rivaled anything in human civilization. These beings had created a sustainable community that was completely hidden from human detection. The structures were built using advanced construction techniques that created durable, comfortable dwellings while maintaining perfect camouflage from aerial surveillance. The buildings were integrated into the natural landscape in ways that enhanced rather than damaged the environment, demonstrating understanding of ecological principles that exceeded human engineering capabilities. Their technology was different from ours, but it wasn't primitive, Patterson observed. They had achieved the same goals as human engineering: shelter, comfort, durability, but through methods that worked with nature instead of against it. Their buildings were stronger and more comfortable than most human structures, but they were completely invisible from the air. The agricultural systems were equally impressive, producing abundant food while enhancing, rather than damaging, the natural ecosystem. The creatures had developed farming techniques that increased soil fertility, supported wildlife populations, and maintained ecological balance while meeting all their nutritional needs. They had solved the problems that human agriculture still struggles with, Patterson noted. They were producing more food per acre than most human farms, but they were doing it in ways that made the environment healthier instead of destroying it. They had achieved true sustainability, but perhaps most impressive was the social organization of the community. The creatures had developed systems for decision-making, conflict resolution, and resource distribution that eliminated the hierarchical power structures that characterized human societies. They didn't have leaders in the way we understand leadership, Patterson explained. Decisions were made through discussion and consensus, with everyone's input being considered and respected. They had achieved true democracy, true equality, in ways that human societies have never managed. During his 6 days in the creature community, Patterson learned enough of their language to engage in basic communication and gained insight into their culture, values, and understanding of the world around them. The creature's intelligence exceeded human norms in several key areas, including memory, pattern recognition, and environmental analysis. They possessed detailed knowledge of ecological systems that allowed them to predict weather patterns, animal behavior, and environmental changes with remarkable accuracy. Their understanding of the natural world was encyclopedic, Patterson documented. They knew the behavior patterns of every species in their territory, the properties of every plant, the cycles of weather and climate that affected their environment. Their knowledge was more comprehensive than anything in human scientific literature, but more impressive than their intelligence was their moral and ethical development. The creatures had developed a sophisticated system of ethics that governed their interactions with each other, with other species, and with their environment. They had achieved what human civilization claims to aspire to, but has never accomplished, Patterson observed. True justice, true equality, true concern for the welfare of all living things. They were living examples of what intelligent beings could become if they developed wisdom to match their capabilities. The creatures' attitude toward humans was complex and nuanced. They were aware of human civilization and had been monitoring human expansion for decades, but their response was characterized more by concern than hostility. They saw us as a species with tremendous potential, but lacking the wisdom to use our capabilities responsibly, Patterson explained. They were worried about our tendency toward violence, environmental destruction, and social inequality. They wanted to help us, but they weren't sure we were ready for the kind of wisdom they could offer. The creatures had been aware of military operations directed against their populations and understood that some humans viewed them as threats to be eliminated, but their response was defensive rather than aggressive, focused on protection and concealment rather than retaliation. They knew that the military was hunting them, Patterson revealed. They had been monitoring our communications, tracking our movements, and preparing for the possibility that we would eventually find them. But they weren't planning to fight back. They were planning to disappear. The The creature's defensive capabilities were far more sophisticated than anything Patterson had encountered in his military career. They had developed stealth techniques, communication systems, and countermeasures that could neutralize most human technological advantages. They could disappear completely whenever they wanted to, Patterson noted with obvious admiration. Their camouflage wasn't just visual. They could eliminate their heat signatures, mask their scent, and move through the forest without making any sound. They were invisible when they chose to be. But the creatures also possessed capabilities that could be used offensively if they were forced to defend themselves. Their physical strength, speed, and coordination exceeded human norms by significant margins, and their understanding of human technology allowed them to develop countermeasures for most military equipment. They could have eliminated my team at any time, Patterson admitted. We were completely outmatched in terms of physical capabilities, environmental knowledge, and tactical understanding. If they had wanted us dead, we would have been dead before we knew we were under attack. The creature's restraint in the face of human aggression impressed Patterson more than their capabilities. Despite being hunted, studied, and threatened by human military forces, they consistently chose peaceful responses and demonstrated concern for human welfare that exceeded what humans typically showed for creature welfare. They were better than us, Patterson stated simply in his confession. More intelligent, more ethical, more concerned with the welfare of other species. They had achieved everything that human civilization claims to value, but has never been able to accomplish. Patterson's time in the creature community came to an end when his team's communication equipment began functioning properly, and they received orders to return to base immediately. The creatures, aware that the humans would be leaving, provided them with supplies and guidance that would ensure their safe return to civilization. They gave us food, medicine, and detailed information about the safest route back to our extraction point, Patterson documented. They were concerned about our welfare even though they knew we represented a threat to their security. They helped us because it was the right thing to do, not because they expected anything in return. The farewell between Patterson's team and the creature community was emotional for both sides. The beings had formed genuine friendships with the humans, and there was obvious sadness at the prospect of permanent separation. They knew we might never see each other again, Patterson recalled with obvious emotion. They understood that I would have to report back to my superiors, and that my report might lead to military action against their community, but they didn't blame us for that. They understood that we were following orders just as they were following their own moral principles. The creature who had first contacted Patterson gave him a final message that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Through their improvised communication system, the being expressed hope that humans would eventually develop the wisdom necessary for peaceful coexistence, but also warned that the creature's patience was not unlimited. He told me that his people wanted to be friends with humans, but that they would defend themselves if we continued to hunt them, Patterson documented. He said they hoped we would choose wisdom over fear, but that they were prepared for either possibility. Patterson's return to base created an immediate crisis for his superiors. His report of peaceful contact with intelligent beings contradicted everything the military had been told about creature nature and capabilities, and his recommendation for diplomatic rather than military solutions was completely contrary to established policy. They didn't want to hear what I had to tell them, Patterson admitted in his confession. I was reporting that the creatures were intelligent, peaceful, and willing to cooperate, but the military had already decided that they were dangerous animals that needed to be eliminated. My report threatened the entire justification for the operations they were planning. Patterson was immediately debriefed by intelligence officers, who questioned every aspect of his account and demanded detailed information about creature capabilities, weaknesses, and defensive measures. The focus of their questioning made it clear that they were interested in military intelligence rather than diplomatic possibilities. They wanted to know how to kill them, Patterson realized with growing horror. They weren't interested in peaceful contact or cooperation. They wanted tactical information that could be used to eliminate the creatures more effectively. I had been used as a spy against beings who had saved my soldier's life and treated us as honored guests. Patterson's refusal to provide tactical intelligence that could be used against the creatures resulted in his immediate reassignment to a non-combat position and the classification of his mission report at levels that prevented any possibility of public disclosure. They buried my report and transferred me to a desk job where I couldn't cause any more problems, Patterson explained. They made it clear that if I ever talked about what I had experienced, I would face court-martial, imprisonment, and possible elimination as a security threat. For the next 43 years, Patterson carried the knowledge of what he had experienced while watching from the sidelines as military operations continued against creature populations across the United States. His attempts to advocate for diplomatic solutions were ignored, and his warnings about the consequences of continued aggression were dismissed. "I spent the rest of my career knowing that we were making a terrible mistake," Patterson confessed. "I had seen what these beings were capable of, both in terms of wisdom and defensive capabilities. I knew that hunting them was not only morally wrong but strategically stupid, but no one wanted to listen to a soldier who had been compromised by enemy contact." Patterson's personal life was destroyed by the psychological burden of maintaining his silence about experiences that had fundamentally changed his understanding of intelligence, consciousness, and humanity's place in the world. "I couldn't tell my wife, my children, or my closest friends about the most important experience of my life," Patterson admitted. "I had to live with the knowledge that I had met beings who were superior to humans in every way that mattered, but I couldn't share that knowledge with anyone. It was like carrying a secret that could change the world, but being forbidden to reveal it." The moral complexity of Patterson's situation was compounded by his growing realization that his silence was contributing to ongoing violence against beings who had shown him nothing but kindness and respect. "Every time I heard about military operations against creature populations, I knew that I could have prevented those operations by speaking out," Patterson confessed with obvious anguish. "But I also knew that breaking my silence would result in my elimination and wouldn't necessarily save the creatures. I was trapped between my loyalty to my oath and my obligation to protect innocent beings." Patterson's decision to finally break his silence was triggered by his terminal cancer diagnosis and his realization that he would soon die without ever revealing the truth about his experiences. "I'm dying anyway," Patterson stated in his final recording. "They can't threaten me with anything worse than what's already happening to my body, but the truth needs to survive even if I don't. The world needs to know what these beings are really like and what we've been doing to them in the name of national security." Patterson's confession was recorded over several sessions during his final weeks of life as cancer consumed his body but left his mind clear and focused on preserving his testimony for future generations. "I want people to know that we had a chance to learn from beings who had achieved everything we claim to aspire to," Patterson explained during one of his final recordings. "We could have learned their secrets of sustainable living, peaceful conflict resolution, and true social justice. Instead, we chose to hunt them because we couldn't tolerate the existence of beings who were superior to us." Patterson's testimony included detailed descriptions of creature technology, social organization, and capabilities that could revolutionize human understanding of sustainable development and peaceful coexistence. "They had solved every problem that human civilization struggles with," Patterson documented. "Poverty, environmental destruction, social inequality, violent conflict. They had found solutions to all of these challenges while maintaining individual freedom and cultural diversity. They were living proof that intelligence and wisdom could create paradise on Earth." But Patterson's confession also included warnings about the consequences of continued human aggression against creature populations. "They're still out there," Patterson warned in his final statement, "still watching us, still hoping that we'll develop the wisdom necessary for peaceful coexistence. But their patience isn't unlimited, and our continued violence against them may eventually force them to defend themselves more actively." Patterson's assessment of creature defensive capabilities suggested that any large-scale conflict between humans and creatures would result in devastating losses for human forces. "We're completely outmatched," Patterson admitted. "They're stronger, faster, more intelligent, and better adapted to wilderness conditions than any human soldier. They understand our technology better than we understand theirs, and they've had decades to prepare for the possibility of systematic conflict. If we force them to fight, we're going to lose." But more importantly, Patterson argued that conflict with the creatures would represent a moral failure that would define humanity's character for generations to come. "These beings represent the best of what intelligence can become," Patterson concluded. "They've achieved wisdom, compassion, and sustainability that human civilization has never approached. Destroying them would be like burning down the Library of Alexandria. We would be eliminating knowledge and wisdom that could guide us toward a better future." Patterson died peacefully on March 22, 2022, surrounded by family members who had finally learned the truth about his most significant military mission. His confession was discovered among his personal effects, and has since been verified through independent research that confirms many of the details he provided. The implications of Patterson's testimony extend far beyond the confirmation of creature existence. His account provides unprecedented insight into the nature of intelligence, the possibility of interspecies cooperation, and the moral challenges faced by individuals who are required to maintain silence about experiences that could benefit all humanity. Sergeant Major Patterson's confession is the most detailed first-hand account of peaceful human-creature interaction ever documented, one researcher noted. His testimony provides evidence that these beings are not only real, but are superior to humans in ways that could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness and civilization. Patterson's legacy is a challenge to humanity to choose between continued denial and the difficult process of acknowledging our mistakes and seeking peaceful coexistence with beings who have demonstrated wisdom that exceeds our own. His 6 days with the creature community provide a roadmap for what human-creature relations could become if we could overcome our fear, arrogance, and need to dominate everything we encounter. Patterson showed us what was possible, one analyst observed. Peaceful contact, mutual respect, and cooperation between species that could benefit all life on Earth. The question is whether we're wise enough to follow his example and brave enough to admit that we've been wrong about these beings for decades. The creatures are still out there, still watching, still hoping that humanity will prove worthy of the friendship and knowledge they once offered. Sergeant Major Patterson's confession is our guide to that future, if we're courageous enough to follow it and humble enough to learn from the beings he came to respect and admire. The choice is ours, but the window of opportunity may be closing. Patterson's testimony suggests that the creature's patience is not unlimited, and that our continued aggression may eventually force them to conclude that peaceful coexistence is impossible. The time for choosing is now. If you found Sergeant Major Patterson's incredible testimony as shocking as we did, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our investigations into the military's most classified encounters. Share this video to help expose the truth about First Contact that they've been hiding for decades, and let us know in the comments what you think about this soldier's brave confession. Your engagement helps us continue bringing you the suppressed military stories they don't want you to know about.